Welcome, everyone. We will begin the webinar in another minute or two. I still see some new attendees coming in, so we'll give it just 1 or 2 more minutes. Thank you. Okay, we will go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. We're very happy that you are able to join us today. My name is Zach Crosser, and I am a Senior Research Monitoring and Evaluation Officer on the USAID-funded Momentum Knowledge Accelerator. Before we get started today, I just want to go over a few housekeeping points. Next slide, please. If at any point during today's webinar you are unable to hear the speakers, please make sure that you've connected your audio by selecting the headphones icon. And if you haven't done so already, and I don't think anyone has just yet, we would like to invite you to introduce yourself in the chat by sending a message to everyone. Please include your name, title, and organization that you're affiliated with. Also for today, we have enabled closed captioning in English for this webinar. To view the English subtitles on your screen, click on the CC icon and select Show Subtitle. And then also please note that we are recording today's webinar. After the webinar has concluded, we will be posting a recording on the Momentum YouTube site, and we will be sharing it with all participants. Next slide, please. I will now be handing it over briefly to my colleague, Courtney, who will provide instructions on how to access the French interpretation for today's webinar.
Good morning. If you need at any point to use interpretation, click the globe button and select your language. We prefer, even if you're listening in English, that you select the English channel so that just to optimize your listening experience. I'm going to bear with me now and I'll repeat the same instructions in French. The last thing that you'll want to do if you enable interpretation is to mute original audio so that you don't hear both languages at the same time. Pour écouter en français, cliquez sur l'icône d'interprétation et sélectionnez français pour avoir la possibilité d'écouter le webinaire en français. Zach, back to you.
Thanks, Courtney. Next slide, please. And finally, throughout the webinar, you can ask questions using the Q&A function in Zoom. Please don't add questions into the chat. Please use the Q&A channel instead. So in the Q&A channel, you will be able to see everyone's questions and even upvote or like other people's questions that you want answered. We will be collating all questions and we'll do our best to address them by the end of the webinar. Next slide, please. And so with the housekeeping out of the way, we will begin to dig into the webinar. So today's webinar is hosted by Momentum, which is USAID's flagship suite of integrated projects that work alongside governments, private and civil society organizations, and other stakeholders to accelerate improvements in maternal, newborn, and child health, nutrition, and voluntary family planning and reproductive health. Using a targeted, context-specific approach, Momentum works to strengthen the capacity of myriad stakeholders to create demand for, deliver, scale up, and sustain quality evidence-based interventions. Today's session is the first of a two-part webinar series hosted by Momentum entitled Family Planning Measurement in Focus. Both webinars in this series will be presented by speakers from the Track 20 project. Today, we are lucky to have Dr. Kristen Beach give an overview of the Family Planning Estimation Tool, or FPET, and describe how it is used by FP 2030 countries across the globe. The Family Planning Estimation Tool allows users to produce annual estimates of contraceptive use, demand satisfied, and unmet need using available survey data and service statistics. FPET is a country-facing adaptation of the United Nations Population Division's model used to calculate global estimates. Today's session will include a hands-on demonstration of the tool. We encourage all participants to create your own FPET accounts so that you can follow along with the live demonstration that will take place toward the end of the webinar. My colleague Emily will share a link in the chat where you can create an account for FPET. Please note that you will be required to validate your email address in order to finalize your account setup. Lastly, we will also share a link where you can access slides and resources and worksheets relevant for today's session. Next slide, please. The second webinar in the Family Planning Measurement in Focus series will be held on Wednesday, March 13th at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. This webinar will focus on the Service Statistics to Estimated Modern Use tool, which allows family planning programs to transform routine service statistics across all contraceptive methods into a single metric for estimated modern use. Please register for this webinar using the link that will be shared in the chat. We'll be sharing the link throughout the webinar, so you'll have multiple opportunities to access the link in the chat. Next slide, please. I will soon be handing it over to Dr. Kristen Beach, who is a senior demographer at Avenir Health, where she conducts research as part of the Track 20 project. Her interests include family planning, fertility, and child health. Dr. Beach lives in Connecticut and holds a PhD in demography from Princeton University. Dr. Beach, over to you.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here with you today. As you can see in the chat, we have many FPET experts with us on this call. My colleagues, Emily Sonneveld and Rebecca Rosenberg, will be helping to answer any of your quick questions in the Q&A, and any longer questions I'll answer as well. You can also see when you're going through the introduction in the chat that we have many Track 20 monitoring and evaluation experts on this call. So if you see anyone from your country and you'd like to reach out, please feel free to do that. And if you have any questions about FPET following this webinar, we are more than happy to chat. We have a Track 20 website with many resources, including a FPET tutorial, which goes into many more details that I'll be able to touch on today. Thank you. Next slide. I think you might have skipped one slide. Do you mind going back? Thank you. All right. So the motivation for both today's talk and the family planning estimation tool in general is, how do we estimate current modern contraceptive use? And this graphic here shows a few different options. You'll see this blue line with these dots are surveys over time. So let's say that our most recent survey was in 2010. One option is we just assume that MCPR hasn't changed since 2010, and that would give us an MCPR estimate of 46%. Now, you might say, no, I know we've been expanding our program. It doesn't make sense for us to assume constant MCPR after our last survey. Okay, well, let's extrapolate the trend from the last two surveys and keep it going forward. That would put MCPR for this country at 53%. Well, that's quite different than 46%. Okay, maybe you don't like that much. Maybe you think that the program ramped up between the last two surveys, but you don't think that's going to keep continuing. All right, well, let's look at the last 3 surveys, which would be here in yellow. Then you have 49%. Maybe someone argues we should extrapolate from all surveys we have over time. Well, that would actually put us up at 56%. And then someone from the other side of the room yells, well, we have service statistics. We keep track in our DHIS2 or our HMIS, and we know that our family planning program has grown. How can we use those? And so you can see here how you could have an entire conversation about what MCCR should be, and you're going to end up with 5 different opinions. And so that was really the motivation with developing the FPET tool, is to figure out how to use all of this data, all of the surveys we've had before, the service statistics we're currently collecting. How do we put that all together to come up with the best estimate of MCPR now? Next slide, please. There are many advantages of using the FPET tool that I kind of want to sell you on now before I show you how the tool was made. First, the FPET tool was developed to provide us with annual estimates. Usually, if we're lucky, we get surveys every 5 years. So we want to know progress, and it provides us with something that's not outdated from a survey. We also want to be able to compare multiple surveys that might show similar or dissimilar trends. One country could have data from PMA, MIX, and DHS, and they could all show slightly different trends. How do we include all of this information together? FPET also supports governments in using data produced through the public sector health services. So this is what I was talking about, service statistics. Most countries are currently monitoring family planning programs through service statistics. How many packets of pills are being distributed to women? How many IUDs are being inserted? We have all of this data, and we have it very, very recently, up to the last month. We know how many services were being delivered. How can we integrate that into our with our survey data to produce estimates? One of the key things is FPET is available online and can be used by anyone. This encourages transparency and ownership of the results. And so after I go through the slides today, we'll be doing a hands-on demonstration of FPET. Part of the Track 20 project is that we train monitoring and evaluation officers to use the model, and many of them are on this call today. And every year, they will run FPET themselves and then present the work at an annual consensus meeting in their country. And then those results are agreed upon and sent to FP 2030 for annual reporting. FPET uses the same methodology as the UN and has been used in the field of HIV. So we've worked closely with UN Population Division in the production of FPET, and I'll go into some more details of that in a few slides. And the inspiration for using both surveys and service statistics, it comes from this field of HIV, which has been doing this for a long time. And I've done several presentations on FPET in the past where I've had people in the room who are HIV experts, and they say, hey, this model seems really familiar. And it's because it is. It is inspired by the collaboration of surveys and service statistics and Bayesian modeling that has been used for years in HIV. Another part of FPET, which I won't get into today, but you are more than welcome to go look online or emails for more information, is that FPET can be applied to decentralized areas. So we can produce estimates not only at the national level, but the state level or the county level, depending on your survey data and service statistics data from your country. And this we found is more and more important as many countries are making health decisions at lower geographic levels. Next slide, please. So to start us off, I want to play a short video by one of our Track 20 monitoring evaluation officers, Brighton, who's actually, I believe, on the call today. We're going to play a video he recorded just in case it was past his bedtime during this webinar. And please turn your speakers up because the volume is a bit low.
Hello everyone, my name is Brighton Muzawase. I'm the Track 20 M&D officer for Zimbabwe. I work in the Ministry of Health, mostly with different departments in the reproductive health unit and HMIS. I also work with different partners in the country who are in the family planning program, trying to improve family planning measurements in the country. One of the tools I use mostly is the family planning estimation tool. I use this tool to generate indicator estimates for indicators such as modern contraceptive preference rate and met need and demand satisfied on an annual basis. These indicators are very key in our family planning programming, and traditionally we're getting data for these indicators from surveys which are conducted periodically, in most cases every 5 years. So the challenge which was there was that in between surveys was no accurate and reliable data to report on and also to make informed decisions at the national level. So FPET has made it easy for us to get data for these indicators on an annual basis. And the good thing about FPET is that we can generate indicator estimates at sub-national level. So different provinces, they've got their family planning data requirements, they've got their targets, they need to monitor progress on the family planning program. And now they can get that data from FPET. In country, FPET data is being used to track our FP 2030 commitments. It is also used to track progress on SDGs, specifically the indicator on demand satisfied. It is also being used to monitor progress on the implementation of family planning strategy and the costed implementation plan, among other reporting requirements required by the country. The good thing about FPET is that it has the ability to include service statistics in generating these estimates. So when we started using FPET, we have seen an improvement in the quality of our family planning routine data, as we are now doing more and more data quality checks before using FPET. I also like the ability to have indicator estimates on all women, married women, and unmarried women. Thank you.
Thank you, Brighton. He touched on many points we're going to talk about as we move on with this webinar. Next slide, please. FPET is built on an existing model that underlies the framework. This model comes from the UN Population Division and estimates annual key family planning indicators. So it can be used not just for modern contraceptive use, but it can be used for contraceptive use in general, traditional method use, unmet need, and demand satisfied for modern contraception. If you go on the UN Population Division website, you will see world contraceptive use, and those indicators are derived using FPET. Track 20 is built on this existing framework. Both the UN model and FPET allow you to measure annual progress on key family planning indicators. However, there are a few key differences between the UN and the Track 20 model that I'll discuss next. Next slide, please. And this section of the webinar is going to be the most technical. So I hope you had your coffee or your tea, as we're going to go in very shortly and to a very sky overview of Bayesian statistics. Now, don't worry, there's going to be no test on this, no equations or anything like that. And hopefully by the end of the next few slides, you'll have a nice understanding of how FPET can take all of the different data I've discussed already and put that together to create annual estimates of different family planning indicators. Next slide, please. So the United Nations model takes all data from all countries in the surveys from all countries in the world and runs the model one time. It takes about 3 days to do this. That wasn't going to work if we wanted an individual person from an individual country who is just interested in their country over time. No one has 3 days to sit and wait for a model to converge. So what Trek 20 did is moved from this global model to a one country version. And it takes all the information from that UN model and puts it into that one country version. And what that does is it dramatically reduces the time it takes to run a single country. Now a single country FPET run takes between 5 and 15 minutes to run. It also, so that now gives us the ability to run one country at a time. It also allows us to have the information from the United Nations model. So how FPET works is that it takes information from within a country, but if a country is lacking data, they hadn't had a survey in a long time, if they've had very few surveys, it will also take information from countries around them, from regional and sub-regional values of the global model. And that helps inform the projections from a one country version. The next big thing about the one country version that we're going to look at today is that it also lets you add in survey statistics to inform estimates. Survey statistics in general inform projections past the last survey point. So they tell us how things have changed since that survey was performed. These estimates are anchored by surveys, meaning that we have survey statistics data overlapping with the most recent survey. And then that allows estimates to be modified based on annual data. So we can see if there's, for continuing our trajectory that the survey's shown, or if the trajectory is moving up or down, if progress is accelerating or decelerating. Another key component of the FPET model is that it's available online for open use. Anyone can register their email and run FPETs, and they can run as many as they want. There's no limit. Next slide, please. So how does the model work? FPET is a Bayesian hierarchical model. And what does that mean? So what that means is it takes all of the information we can give it, all the survey data, all the different points over time, and it creates different likelihoods. So what is the likelihood that MCPR is going to be a certain level based off all the information we know? It's using this data to create these trends, both at individual countries and then globally. And what it allows us to do is to take multiple sources of data and include that information, but also treat them as different sources, right? So it knows that a DHS and a mix and a PMA are all different surveys and therefore might have different results from one another. It also allows us to incorporate survey statistics, which are not the same as survey data. And so because it can take that information in, but recognize that these are different sources, it allows us to create a singular trend over time. It also allows us to take information in from different data points. For example, some surveys might have CPR, but we might not have unmet need, and that's okay. It still allows us to input whatever data we have. It also allows for different levels of data. And so I talked about, while we're looking at an individual country, the model itself also looks at regional and global trends over time. And that helps us when we have a country with minimal data. So using all its information, the model aims to provide the best estimate for each indicator, given all available data, and an estimate of confidence intervals around each data point. So that's also a key here. We're not just providing an estimate of what we think contraception is, we're giving an interval around what we think contraception is and could be. Next slide, please. This is just a demonstration of all of the different data that's put into FPET. So you can see here that there are well over 1,000 surveys that live in FPET. We have over 300 surveys from the DHS, 800 national surveys, 200 mixed surveys, 40 PMA surveys. And then for individual countries, many of them will choose to use high quality service statistics data to inform their last trend. And we generally have between 15 and 20 countries every year that use service statistics as part of their FP 2030 annual estimates. Next slide, please. A brief view of service statistics in FPET. Service statistics are transformed into something called an EMU, estimated modern use. And to do this, we have an estimated modern use tool, which can then be entered into FPET. FPET can use 4 different types of service statistics. Commodities delivered to clients, and that's, for example, how many packets of pills were given to women. Commodities get distributed to facilities, how many packets of pills were delivered to clinics. Visits, how many women came in for a pills visit. And then users, which are in some countries where women are tracked over time to see if they're using family planning. If you're interested in using service statistics in FPET, please join us for an EMU webinar on Wednesday, March 13th, where my colleague Jessica Williamson will be going through all of the calculations used to create EMU. And at the end, you can then input your EMU into FPET. Next slide, please. When using service statistics in FPET, we have a few rules. The first is that you have to have 3 years of service statistics data. And so that's so we can look at the consistency of data over time. You need 1 year of data overlapping a survey. And that's so that service statistics can be anchored by survey data. You need 1 year of statistics data after the most recent survey, because we want to look at changes since that survey. And you have to have high reporting rates of family planning data into your service statistics system, so higher than 80%. Next slide, please. FPET, an underlying assumption of FPET is that contraceptive use over time changes in what we call an S-shaped curve. And so you can see that here. If you look in this blue section, stage 1, where you have low prevalence, we expect contraceptive use to change slowly at this period of time, where there's low demand, and we don't expect rapid change in contraceptive use. At some point, there is a tipping point where we move into this stage 2, where historically we've seen family planning programs rapidly expand in a relatively short period of time. And we've seen this in many countries across the globe, where you have an expansion of contraceptive use. Eventually, you reach a high level of prevalence, and contraceptive use growth starts to slow. And that's because you reached as many women in general as you might be able to, based off fertility desires and population structure, etc. So this underlying assumption about growth is incorporated in the model, that at low and high levels of prevalence, we expect slower change than in this middle area where you can see rapid acceleration. And this is based off previous national, regional, and global trends we've seen. Next slide, please. And so you can see here a demonstration of how FPET works. These black dots are different surveys of contraceptive use over time. And you can see FPET is trying to draw lines, right? It's trying to figure out the best way to draw a line through these surveys and also extend that line into the future. And this is how FPET works. It draws thousands of these trajectories to find what best fits the data and then what that future trend would look like. And that is how we get both a median estimate, but also confidence intervals around that estimate. Next slide, please. FPET is actually 2 separate models. Initially, when FPET was first created, it was only made to look at married or in-union women. However, Track 20 and FP 2030 have always reported all women estimates. This is something that we believe is very important in terms of rights-based family planning. In the middle of the Track 20 project several years ago, the United Nations developed an unmarried model. This is very, very similar to the married model, except it adds another layer of information. So we've already talked about how FPET divides countries into regions to borrow information. Well, another breakdown in this unmarried model is that it adds information on non-marital sexual activity. So it defines countries as countries where there is non-marital sexual activity and countries where there's almost no unmarried sexual activity. And if you're interested, we have on our FPET website a link to this article that they've written where they define what countries are grouped into which categories. Now, how FPET works is it's running two different models, the married women and the unmarried women, and then it's combining them to create an all-women model. So actually, when you get results from FPET, you can have results from all three of these populations, married, unmarried, and all. And that's been really usefully found over time, as some countries have goals that look just at married women, and some countries have goals that look at all women. And so these three models can give even more information. Next slide, please. So I've talked about a lot of data here, right? I a few slides ago talked about how there's already 1,000+ surveys in FPET. So there are quite a few data requirements in FPET, but we've tried to make it as simple as possible. First, survey data is included in default database on the FPET website. This is something we update every year in the springtime. In fact, we're currently in the middle of our 2024 update. So we have separate entries for married and unmarried women, which you might have guessed based off of the last slide where I talked about how we have the two separate models. Users have complete control over this. They can add new surveys, which I'm actually going to show you how to do today, or they can delete surveys. We've had monitoring and evaluation officers in the past delete surveys because they questioned the validity of the survey results. And that is something that anyone can do in FPET. And then they can create basically their own survey file that has just the surveys they're interested in. We also have population data preloaded into FPET. So we have annual estimates of married and unmarried women of reproductive age. And these are created using the UN Population Division's World Population Prospects and World Marriage data. And these data are currently from the 2022 update from World Population Prospects. And we expect a new database to come from them in the summer, fall of 2024. Survey statistics are optional, and they must be added by the user. Because survey statistics are generally owned by the country that would be using them, they are not something we store on the FPET website for public use. But you will learn if you attend our next webinar how to create your own survey statistics and add them to your personal FPET profile so that you can run FPET with them. Subnational data can also be used in FPET, and we have tutorials on our website on how to create subnational data. And for many countries, we've already created subnational data. So if you have an interest, please reach out. And if we've already created it, we can provide it to you. Or we can look at how much time it would take for us to produce these subnational FPET input files. Next slide, please. Before we turn to running FPET, I wanted to take you through a couple of case studies communicating the value of FPET. Next slide, please. I'm going to walk through 3 different times when FPET has been extremely useful. The first is when there's conflicting survey information. This is an example where we have varying types of surveys in a single year or given years, and the trends then are hard to differentiate. Another example is when we have little or outdated data where we haven't had a survey in a long time, but we still want to be able to provide annual estimates. And the third is how we include survey statistics data to improve our estimates of FPET. Next slide, please. Here's an example from Ghana. Back between 2000 and 2015, they had 10 surveys, 4 different types of surveys. They had DHS, which is in the blue. There were 3 DHS. They had 2 mixed surveys, which is in the green. They had 4 PMAs in the purple, and then 1 national survey back in 2005 in the orange. And so you can see that the values shifted across surveys. So example, if you were just interested in the trend over time, you would think that contraceptive use had gone from 18% down to 16%, down to 14%, up to 16%, up to 25%, down to 18%, and then back up again, right? So depending on when that last survey came around, you could have a very different trend in your contraceptive use. Of course, then there are politics associated with choosing one survey over the other. We're discussing the current situation. But you can see that the different surveys themselves have different trends over time. So FPET is a perfect way in which to talk about all of this information in a single time. Next slide, please. So here again, you see that same data and you see the trends over time. And you see this blue line, and that is FPET taking all of this information in together and creating what it believes to be the most realistic trend over time in contraceptive use. Next slide, please. Here again, you see this information. So in the top right corner, that is what the FPET output would look like, the different colors for the different surveys. And then you see this black line, which is your median estimate, and these purple areas, which are your confidence intervals. So FPET has taken into account all of the data available for Ghana, as well as regional and global trends to create this MCPR estimate. And so the nice thing about FPET is it allows us to have a single narrative. And you don't have the challenge of choosing one data point or the other or discussing the merits of the different studies. FPET is using all of the data that's been collected to come up with a trend over time. Next slide, please. Here's another example of Somalia and what to do when there's very, very little data. So between 1970 and 2019, there were only 2 surveys that were conducted in Somalia, one in 1999 and one in 2006. And so if you look at the FPET output on the right, you see those 2 blue dots. It's pretty difficult to understand change since there's been so little data. But if we take information on global and regional trends, it's probably not the case that the prevalence has just been stagnant over time, right? So in 2006, the MCPR for married women was 1.2%. And then in 2019, FPET predicted that it was 3.7%. So like I said, not a high MCPR, because if you remember when I talked about the S curve, Somalia is at the very beginning of the S curve where there's very low contraceptive use and expected to be very low contraception over time. But what you'll also notice is the width of the purple area has become quite large since the last survey. And what this tells us is, while we think contraceptive use is still low, there's quite a variability in what contraceptive use could be. Next slide, please. Here's an example of how statistics can improve our estimates. So this is an example from Tanzania, where there were 8 surveys between 1980 and 2016. And the last survey was in 2016, though the new one has just been released, but this is an example from before we had that new DHS. The last survey in 2016, we assume the contraceptive prevalence has increased since then. Tanzania had a very consistent trend in their statistics, which is that on that second graphic, those black dots is their trend in statistics. And they had statistics overlapping that 2016 survey and indicating a steady upwards trend. So by incorporating the statistics we have more data on recent trends, which is especially important in short-term monitoring. You can see that the blue trend line has been shifted up in that bottom graphic compared to the top graphic because the SIR statistics indicated that contraceptive use was actually increasing faster than FPET would have predicted without SIR statistics. It also gives us more confidence in our estimates. And so you can see that the purple area shrinks in the years that we have these SIR statistics compared to the top graphic where we don't have SIR statistics. This also supports government ownership of their data. And we've seen over the last 10 years of this project that more and more countries have high quality SIR statistics data. And just the process every year of looking at this data and seeing the trends and whatnot has led to improvements in SIR statistics data. Many times now, these SIR statistics are presented at consensus meetings in countries and give an opportunity for people who might not already be looking at SIR statistics data to weigh in on its quality and usefulness. And this has led to improvement in SIR statistics in many areas. And so you can see here that because we included SIR statistics in this estimate, the median estimate in 2019 actually was 2.5 percentage points higher than if we hadn't used SIR statistics, and we had a smaller confidence interval. So this is just a great example of how SIR statistics can be incorporated into FPET, which has been really useful in this kind of longer period we've had since surveys because of pauses in surveys due to COVID. We had a long time without survey data. We are now starting to see more surveys come in that were delayed due to COVID, but the use of SIR statistics has helped us see the impacts of family planning programs over time since the most recent surveys in many countries. Next slide, please. Now, before we go into FPET for our hands-on tutorial, I have one more video to show. This is by Naveen, who was on at one point. I'm not sure if he's still on. It's very late in India. Who's going to tell us about how he uses FPET for his work at both the national and state level.
Hello everyone, this is Naveen Roy. As part of Track 20 India team, we are supporting to Family Planning Division, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India by providing annual estimates of MCPR, unmet need for modern method, demand satisfied with modern method, and impact indicator such as unintended pregnancies averted, birth averted, maternal death averted, etc., by using various Track 20 tools. The ministry frequently uses these annual estimates at the various platforms like PIP meetings, state review meetings, and other FE activities. Apart from this, to monitor the performance of FE program on routine basis, we also analyze periodic program data which we receive from 37 states and monthly service statistic family planning data. Based on these data and estimates of family planning indicator, we prepare FE program note for each 37 Indian states to track the performance of family planning program at national level and state level as well. These program notes basically used by NHM. Among various Track 20 tools, a web-based application called Family Planning Estimation Tool is used to produce both national and sub-national annual estimates based on all available survey data and service statistic data related to the family planning services. In India, we basically adopted bottom-up approach to compute the annual estimates of family planning indicator at the national level after excluding the outlier from the survey data at the sub-national level, or you can say state level. An Excel-based Track 20 annual estimate calculator is also being used to calculate the estimates of key FE 2030 indicators and explore the impact of different scenarios of family planning program scale up on various outcomes such as MCPR, prevalence of modern contraceptive, unmet need for modern method, demand satisfied with modern method, unintended pregnancies averted, birth averted, maternal death averted, etc. It produces easy to understand briefs that summarizing progress towards the national goal.
Thank you so much for that. So this concludes the slide portion of the presentation. If there are any questions that people would like to ask about the theoretical questions about FPET before we move on to the demonstration, we can have a few minutes before that. Until then.
Great, thank you, Kristen. So if anyone has any questions, we've listed some of the questions and answered some of the questions in the Q&A box already. But if there are any other questions before Kristen jumps into the demo, now would be a good time to ask those. Maybe we'll give folks a minute or two in case there are any questions. There will also be an opportunity to ask questions after the demo in case there are any demo related questions. So it doesn't look like there are any questions right now, or those have been answered as it is. So maybe Kristen, let's continue into the demonstration and we can stop later and see if there are any additional questions.
Okay, fantastic. I'm gonna share my screen real quick. And yes, as Zachary put in the chat, if you have not yet registered for FPET, please go to the FPET website that he's linked in the chat and register now. All you need to do is enter your email and create a password, and it'll send a link to your email account to confirm your password, your account. All right, I'm going to quickly show a quick slide. So there are two ways to run FPET. The first is with default data, and the second is with custom data. Default data is survey and population data that already exist and is housed in FPET that we put together for you. And if you're going to use default data, we're going to go to the Start Run tab, and you can get your FPET run going right away. If you want to use custom data, which is something either you can enter all of the information or you can edit the default data. For example, like I just said, how you would could delete a survey or add in a new survey. Well, the first step you would do when you get to FPET is go to the Prepare Data tab. Don't worry about remembering this. We're going to go through both of these in a minute. I want to add a quick note here. When we talk about unmarried women in FPET, we are talking about all unmarried women, regardless of if they're sexually active or not. If you look at survey reports, for example, a DHS, some of them report contraceptive use among unmarried sexually active women. So this is a different population than FPET. FPET looks at contraceptive use among all unmarried women, regardless of sexual activity. So this is something that usually has to be calculated from microdata. If, for example, you want to run FPET and there is a new survey available with microdata, and you would like some help calculating this unmarried number or any of the other FPET inputs, please feel free to reach out to Track 20 and we can help you prepare those inputs. Okay. With that, we're going to do two examples today. We're going to run with the default data that's currently available in FPET for Ghana. And then we're going to run a custom FPET where we are going to enter the new data from the 2022 Ghana DHS, which was recently released. To make it easier for you to follow along, if you go to the website that was put into the chat at the very beginning, the Track 20 website, Track 20 webinar 2024, something like that. On that website, not only are these slides available in both English and French, but there are handouts. There's a handout for running a default FPET and a handout for running a custom FPET. In the French version of the slides, there's also some screenshots. And that's because I'm going to show the FPET tool here in English. But if you'll notice up here, we have two little flags. We have an American flag and a French flag. If you click the French flag, everything in FPET will switch to French. So today I'm going to show the English, but I've included the French screenshots in the French handouts. This is the FPET landing page. If you need to sign in, it will prompt you to sign in. Here are just a few helpful links. For example, a link to the Track 20 tools where we have a very detailed FPET training. Some articles about the underlying Bayesian statistics that are used to create FPET. We have a link here to the United Nations working paper on the unmarried women model, which I discussed in this webinar. And then you can also look at older versions of the World Contraceptive Use, which is the UN model that uses the family planning estimation model for all countries simultaneously. I'm going to be using the default how to complete an FPET run using default data handout for this portion. So the first thing to do is go to the FPET website and log in. We're then going to the Start Run tab. And you'll see this blue bar here moving across the screen, loading all the data, asking me to sign in. You would think it would know me by now. So go back to that Start Run tab. And so you'll see on the side here, you have different options for data. The first thing you need to do is select a survey database. For this example, we're going to use the default data. There's a few different options in here, and we keep these in here for when people have run FPET runs in the past. So the most up-to-date is the Track 20 2023 default database. In the next month or so, there'll be a new database here called the Track 20 2024 database. We then want to select our population. Here we have the UN Population Division 2022 estimates. And then if we wanted to use search statistics, we could. We're not going to use any in this default run. So we just leave this blank. We don't even bother touching anything here. And then we're going to select our country or population. And so for today's example, we're going to run FPET for Ghana. We then want to give our FPET run a name. So I'm going to say Ghana default, and I'm going to add the date in. You know, whatever you want to do to help differentiate the names of your runs. The next thing you want to do is review data. And so you'll see on this main part of the screen, you have three sections. You have your survey data. So let's look at that really quickly. Each line is a different survey, or you might have two lines of the same survey, one for married and one for unmarried women. So for example, here we have a 1988 DHS from Ghana. We have one line, which is the married woman, and the next one is the unmarried woman. And if we scroll over, we can see the different pieces of information that are in here. We have modern contraceptive use, traditional use, all contraceptive use, which is the two added together. We also then have any unmet need. And these numbers are out of one. So this is 35.2% of women have an unmet need for family planning. And then you'll see some more in columns. These columns all talk about different biases. For example, if a geographic bias exists, which none exist in these surveys, but exist in some places where, for example, in Afghanistan, they were unable to interview in certain regions because of safety concerns. Then you would have a note here that it is not the entire country that was included. You also might have an age bias, and that's, for example, if the survey interviewed women outside of the normal 15 to 49 range. We also have if there are probing questions, for example, did you use each method? All of these are included so that we can include surveys that don't fit the standard norm of 15 to 49-year-old women, or who are all asked the same thing. So the whole goal here is to include all of the information we have, but we need to include these biases in here to say that that survey is not exactly the same format as all the other surveys. You'll also see here that we have some, they're called standard errors of log ratios. These are a special standard error that was developed to be used in FPET. There's something we calculate out of microdata. And so if you have microdata from a survey you'd like to include, let us know and we can calculate these for you. These are not the same as the standard errors that are in the back of many survey reports. There's also an ID here. This ID comes from the United Nations. This is how they categorize different countries, surveys in the world contraceptive use. So if you looked at all this and you made sure that all the data was what you wanted to look at, you could move on to population. But first I want to see here, my last survey was in 2003, and that's because it's only showing me the first of 10 surveys. So I can go down here and I can click over the different pages and I can see, okay, I have my PMA surveys in here from Ghana. I have a mix from 2017. Okay, so the new 2022 DHS is not in here yet. And that's because the new data came out after this last Track 20 database was created. So I can also look at the population data, and you'll see here you have 2 lines for every year. So starting in 1970, you have in-union and not in-union women and your population estimates. You could also look at SIR statistics. We see there's none here, and that's because we're doing a default run. If you wanted to add SIR statistics in, they would be right here, and I would suggest you check them before running FPET just to make sure that you entered them all correctly. All right, so now that I've reviewed all my data, I can go to the Start Run tab and click on Start Run button. And it brings me to this Run History page. And so you can see here, these are the FPET runs I've done previously. And this is the run that's currently happening. And you can tell that it's currently happening because it is not blue with underlines. And it has this white hourglass. When FPET is successfully run, that hourglass will turn green. Sometimes it will turn red. If it turns red, the first thing to do is wait a few minutes. It might have been an issue with the cloud connection. So what FPET is doing is taking the input data, sending it up to the cloud where the model is running, and then sending the results back. Every once in a while, that cloud connection can get disconnected and it will automatically reconnect. So it might turn red and then it might turn green a few minutes later. If it turns red and it stays red and you don't know what to do, you can click this little I button and it will download a text document and you can send that off to us at Track 20. Sometimes we've had it where you've entered data and you might have entered it incorrectly. So you had more than 100% of women using contraception or something like that. The model will say there is an error. So you can send that log to us so we can help you troubleshoot it. When an hourglass turns green, it means your run has completed. And this becomes a link. And what this link does is it allows you to go to the View Run tab. And what you can do here is a number of different things. The first thing you can do is actually you can change the years you want displayed or exported. For example, if you're interested in what's happened since 2010, you might not want to see all the data since 1970. You can scroll to 2010, and now it will show you in your results only data from 2010 to 2030. So the first few tabs are things we've already seen. It's our input data, our survey data, our population data, and our source statistics data. We want to go to this results tab. So this just shows you a table, and you can choose different options. You can look at percentages, or you can look at number of women. You can look at any of these different contraceptive indicators. So you can look at contraceptive use, any modern, traditional. You can look at unmet need. You can look at total demand for family planning, etc. All of these things are calculated using FPET. And you can choose which marital status you want to look at, married, unmarried, or all. In this table, you can look at, you see the year, and you see your median estimate. And then these numbers on either side are your confidence intervals. So you have an 80% confidence interval, which is between 10 and 90%. And then you have your 95, which is between 2.5 and 97.5. And so here, these are those purple shaded areas that we saw in the graphics, and I'll show you those in a sec. This can be useful if you're just wanting to look at one number, but what I find most useful is to click download all data. And what you can do then is it'll download you a large Excel file with all of the years, all of the populations, all the indicators, and you can sort through that then. And that is very useful if you want to make your own graphics, or you want different numbers to put in your presentations, etc. You can also go to the chart section. And so here you see that it's showing data from 2010 to 2030. I can also change that and it will update. And so what you see here, again, we're looking at percentage and we're looking at married, and we can toggle between them, is we're looking at all the different indicators that FPET produces. And you'll see these different colors of circles, and those are the different surveys. And there is a legend at the bottom. You can also see different shapes. For example, this green upside down triangle. That is because it's a different population. So the triangle shows ever married women opposed to married women, where the circles show. You can also see that for modern use, traditional, and unmet need, you're going to have these confidence intervals that are because they're based on the survey data. We also then have these two different shades of purple that we looked at before, and these purples correlate to those outer columns that I just showed you in the results tab. You have your dark purple, which is your 80%, and then your light purple, which is your 95%. If you move your cursor over, you can see different years, and it gives you those estimates over time. As with the table, you can also download all the charts here. And that will give you a PDF with all the charts for all the different populations. Also in FPET, we have two different tabs to look at targets and progress. And so this is really useful if you are coming up with a family planning goal or policy, and you want a family planning indicator, such as modern contraceptive prevalence, and you want to figure out what the probability is of you achieving that goal. So let's say that you want to know what the chance is that by 2030, you're going to be at 50% contraceptive prevalence. You can also add in a target. So for example, let's say you're creating a new goal and you want something that's an ambitious goal, but achievable. So you want to know, what is a goal for modern contraceptive use that you only have a 25% chance of achieving? So we can enter that in here, and then it will calculate this based off, those thousands and thousands of FPET projections that it did. It will calculate both of these for us. Right. So it's saying that you only have a 9% chance of reaching 50% MCPR among married women by 2030. So that is a goal that seems unlikely to be achieved. Not impossible, but unlikely. What's a goal that you only have a 25% chance of achieving? 43.7%. So that would be a ambitious but potentially achievable goal for 2030. You also can go to the progress tab, and this just tells you how much things have changed over time. So for example, if you want to look at change in modern contraceptive prevalence among married women over time from 2012, which was the start of FP 2020, to 2024, we can calculate that. And we can also calculate that in terms of the number of women. And so it's saying that in the 12 years, the MCPR has increased by 10 percentage points. And that translates to over 500,000 more women in Ghana were using modern methods of family planning in 2024 than we're using in 2012. All right, so that is an overview of the default data in FPET. But there has been a new DHS that was recently released in FPET, and we want to enter that into our FPET using this file, how to complete an FPET run with custom data. So I have a new survey that's come out, and I want to enter it into FPET. The first thing I'm going to do is go to this Prepare Data tab. And you'll see here, like we've seen throughout this tool, again, we have our 3 different types of data: survey data, population data, and service statistics data. Remember this tab for the March webinar, because this is where you'll enter your email data to be used in FPET. Today, we're going to focus on survey data. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by selecting a database. So I'm going to take this Track 20 database that I already have, and I want to choose a country. Again, I'm going to choose Ghana. And I want to load all of the existing data. So here is that data we looked at when we were doing our default run. And I have plenty of data here. And for this example, I'm going to show you how to both edit data, how you could delete data if you needed to, or how to add a whole new row of data. So for example, let's say you're adding in data and you need to edit the survey type. Right, so I'm going to add a new row of data here, and I want to edit all this data. So the first thing I'm going to do is edit the start year of data. So if you look at the handout, you'll see that the survey in Ghana started in 2022.452. Okay, so that's a very detailed what time of year it started. And the end date of the survey is in 2023. All right. For this example, I'm just adding in the married women data, but now that the micro data has been released, I can enter in both the married and unmarried data. All right, so I already have a check mark here for married women. An X would be for unmarried women. The age group is 15 to 49, so I don't need to worry about that. And then I want to change this data series type. This is telling FPET what type of survey it is. So I'm entering data for a DHS. So I double click and then I click on DHS and it changes that. I'm entering data for married women, so I don't need to change this, but there's many options. You have married, you have all, you have ever married, formerly married, sexually active, and unmarried. So you have many different options, and that's because we want to be able to add in lots of survey data, even if it's not the standard married, unmarried data. Of course, FPET will assign it a bias because it deviates from that normal data. Okay, so now I'm entering in my modern contraceptive use, and I want to enter this in as a proportion. So I'm entering 0.278. The same with traditional. I'm entering it as 0.085. And that adds it together to create that contraceptive use for all data, all methods. I don't need to enter my modern method unmet need. It will calculate that for me, but I do want to enter my unmet need for any method, which is 0.234. if there was a bias, I should add them in here. There are no biases in this survey. Biases tend to happen in older surveys, right? Before surveys became much more uniform as they are today. You can run FPET without entering these standard errors. What it'll end up doing is borrowing standard errors from a similar survey type. But if the microdata is available, you can reach out to us at Track 20 and we'd happily calculate these for you. All right, so now that I've entered that data, I will come down here where it says data set name, and I will create a name for it that reflects the change I've made. So I'm going to say Ghana new 2022 DHS. And I'm going to hit save. And I'll get this green pop-up that tells me that new database has created. One thing you can do here is, let's say for some reason that you didn't want to include this national survey. You know, you work at the Ministry of Health in Ghana, and you've had a big consensus meeting, and you've decided that this was a bias survey. I'm not saying that's true. I'm just using that as an illustration. What you would want to do is, for these two rows, you would highlight them by clicking anywhere in the row. And if you see now it's gray, and you would hit delete survey. And you would do that again for the other national survey row. And then what you'd want to do is save that file. So, you know, Ghana, no 2017 national survey. I'm not going to do that here, but I just want to show you that that is an option if for some reason you did not want to include one of the surveys. All right, so now that our custom data set is done, we are going to the Start Run tab. So now when I'm here, instead of choosing default, I'm choosing custom. And then I go to this drop down and I see here, I have these two custom data sets. They're the same data sets I created. So I'm going to choose the one I just made. Another option is to load something from your computer externally. And this would be a CSV file that you created. It's usually easiest if you create things though in FPET, because then you don't worry about an extra comma or an extra period or something getting shifted. But if you wanted to, you could download this input file as a CSV, email it to your coworker, and they could upload it as an external file. So that is a really useful example of why you would use an external data set. For the population data, we're going to stay with the default data. We didn't make any changes, so we're going to use that UNPD 2022. Again, I have no serve statistics data, so I'm going to leave that part blank. And here, because I have that custom data set that only includes Ghana surveys, it has preloaded Ghana as the country that I'm going to use. So here I would enter in a new name, Ghana 2022 DHS, and I definitely want to review the data before I start the run. And I want to do that because I want to make sure that everything was entered correctly. So here's that new survey. I have that start and end date, age, make sure my marital status is correct, and that my numbers I entered reflect what's in the report. All right, so once I do that, I can start my run, and it's just the same then as the default run was, which you can see over here has actually finished up and is green. And so after that, there's really no difference between a custom run and a default run. You're going to have the same options where you can view the run. And so you could even, this is the one I ran last week. You can view the results. You can look at your charts. One of the things you can do after you've done two runs for the same country is you can actually compare runs in this compare run tab. So I would choose both my default run and then my new 2022 run. And what I can do then is it'll give me that data side by side, both on a table and in charts. So you can see here, it's a lot messy, but we can see here that our dashed lines are our FPET run with our new survey data, and our solid lines are the original run we did before we had that 2022 data in there. And so you can see here that the median estimate is actually lower with the new survey because that new survey was lower than FPET predicted the MCPR would have been before that survey was released. So then you have these charts you could download, the results you could download in this compare run tab. All right, and with that, I'm going to stop sharing and open up for questions.
Thank you so much, Kristen. That was really, really interesting. And thanks for running through that. I think that was really helpful to do the demonstration. I noticed that there have been a number of questions listed in the Q&A. Thank you to Rebecca for answering those as we go along, and to Courtney for translating them. Are there any additional questions right now about the demonstration, or we have a few minutes we could answer some about the FPET tool more generally, if anyone has any? Give folks just a minute in case they're typing. So there's one question here from Maria Plotkin asking, for new surveys, do all of the categories, marital status, etc., have to be entered manually? Data from DHS is not uploaded as data per se.
So when a new survey comes out, and it's before we at Track 20 have created our new annual default database, there is some analysis that needs to take place. Usually with DHS, what they will first do is release a key indicator report, and this will usually have a table of contraceptive use and unmet need for married women. So those numbers can be entered manually then into the custom data tab. When the microdata is available, Track 20 is available to calculate both the standard errors that I showed and also that unmarried data inputs. So if a new survey has come out that is publicly available and you would like some help, we are more than happy to calculate it for you, because it's something we're probably going to be doing ourselves anyway as we prepare the next database. So you can just email the Track 20 email, which I believe is track20@track20.com or something like that. It's on our website. And that will get rerouted to one of us who will be more than happy to help prepare those input files for you if you have any questions about the microdata.
Great, thank you, Kristen. Another question in the chat is, can population data, I assume from NBS, which I assume is the National Bureau of Statistics, be used instead of UN population estimates? And can this affect the results of the estimates?
Excellent question. Thank you so much. So I'm going to take that question in two parts. The first is, can you use your own population data? Yes, of course. So just like you would do with the survey data, if you go to the Prepare Data tab, there is a tab for population data. One caveat is that you need annual estimates for married and unmarried women. And so I've seen annual estimates for all women of reproductive age before, done by different National Bureaus of Statistics, but I've yet to see one that breaks it down by married and unmarried women. Now that's something you could do yourself. What you could use is estimates of marital distribution, or use world marriage data from the UN and break those numbers down yourself. We'd also could help if the data is available. So that is usually one of the barriers, is having that data both historically and projections into the future, but definitely something that can be done and is available to you. The second part of the question was, will that impact results? Yes, so it will not impact married percentage use or unmarried percentage use. It will impact the number of users for both married and unmarried, And it will also impact the all women, because if it's different distribution of married versus unmarried, when those contraceptive use numbers are put together, it will be different weighting, right? When you're calculating that unmarried women, that all women number, which is a weighted average basically of married use and unmarried use, weighted by the percent of the population that is married and unmarried. So that would impact your all women result. But very great question. Definitely a question we see more and more as the new 2020 censuses are being released in many countries. And many countries are seeing changes in marriage patterns following COVID. So this is something we've actually seen quite a bit by different monitoring and evaluation officers.
Great, thank you. So another question in the chat or in the Q&A is, how does a country access your technical assistance? Is it only available for FP 2030 commitment countries?
Great question. So we are available to answer questions to anyone. Ministries of Health, master's students, undergrad students, we've answered questions for everybody. The level of technical assistance might, vary based off what is being asked and who is asking. But no, we have helped anyone that is interested in using FPET, not only just FP 2030 commitment making countries, but different countries all over the world. We've done FPET runs for small islands in the middle of the Pacific. We've done FPET runs in Europe. So we've done FPET runs everywhere. And always able and willing to help. And we also have most of our tools available in French as well, if that helps.
Great. Okay, I think we have a few more questions, maybe 2 more questions that we can answer. Both are in French. It looks like Rebecca just answered one of them, although I'm not sure which one. Rebecca, are you able to come off mute and respond? Oh, okay. All right, I think she just put the answer into one of those. And then there's one question, I don't know if you can see it, it is in French, which I don't speak. Is it preferable to use service statistics?
Oh, in addition to surveys.
In addition to surveys, okay, thank you.
So many countries have started using survey statistics in their FPET runs. And what everyone always does is you run your FPET first with no survey statistics. And then there is a careful review of the survey statistics data before it's even entered into FPET. And then you run FPET with survey statistics. And in general, there is quite a substantial review process that takes place, both by the Track 20 team and the family planning organizations and Ministry of Health in an individual country, to make sure the survey statistics are high quality enough to be used in FPET. So it's always great to add, but before they're used for official estimates for FP 2030, there is a lengthy review process. So I would say there's at least a dozen countries every year that prepare SSTEMU tool, the SSTEMU tool, who do not end up using survey statistics in their FPET. And that does not mean they will never use survey statistics in their FPET. It just means at the time they are not high enough quality. But the annual review of survey statistics is really important for improving their quality. On a personal note, one time I was at a consensus meeting, and it was the first time a lot of people in the room had even seen the survey statistics that were being collected for their own country. And there were some questions going on back and forth. People from the health metrics information system were called into the room to ask questions. And it turns out that there was more training needed by people that were entering the data. People were entering voluntary male circumcision, which is an HIV intervention, as vasectomies, which are quite different things, and is something that wouldn't have been discovered if that meeting hadn't been taking place. So those meetings are really important in terms of quality data review and improving the data over time. And there are many countries now that have, over the last few years, adapted a data system called the District Health Information System, DHIS2. And we've seen their data quality improve over time, but they might be waiting to use those statistics in FPET until they have enough years since their DHIS2 was implemented to have a reasonable trend of statistics.
Great. Thank you very much, Kristen. And yeah, thank you to all of our participants for joining us today, and for your wonderful engagement. And most of all, yeah, thank you to you, Kristen, and to the Track 20 team for your work on the FPET tool and for taking the time to present it here with us today. Before we close today's webinar, we do want to include a reminder here that the second webinar in our Family Planning Measurement in Focus series will take place on Wednesday, March 13th, and we'll encourage you to register using the link that Emily has just shared in the chat. One thing to note is that the time zone listed on this slide is the US East Coast time zone, and due to the daylight savings time, we will be switching from Eastern Standard Time to Eastern Daylight Time between now and the March 13th webinar. So the time of day, depending on where you are in the world, may be 1 hour earlier than today's webinar. So please do keep that in mind and register using the link that was shared in the chat. And finally, when you leave the Zoom session today, you will be prompted to complete a 2-question evaluation survey, and we'd be very, very grateful if you just took a couple minutes to do that when you leave. Thank you all very much.